one question for each game. By the way, just a reminder, next week, normal week for the show, except we're going to do week 18 stuff and 2025 stuff. All right, Denver at Cincinnati. Cortland Sutton's had a couple of one game he scored a touchdown. One game was just bad. 10 fantasy points last week. Going back to Cortland Sutton this week, guys?
100%.
He's a number 2 wide receiver.
Over Garrett Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. The Chargers are at New England. Is there any scenario where you're starting a Chargers running back with confidence?
So I made a decision in one league to it's non-PPR. It's one of my father-son leagues. So my youngest son, he's 6. So just to keep that in perspective, which is why I'm doing it for him. To bench George Pickens in a flex spot for Brian Robinson, because I don't really love Brian Robinson. I didn't really love George Pickens, but to wait out J.K. Dobbins. So I would start Dobbins over Robinson, for example, if he's good to go. So he would be in that, we've talked about this a little bit. I don't know where Heath is on this. I know Dave and I are somewhat in a similar range of the Mixon, Hall, Jerome Ford, that group. It's like running back 16 through 20 for me. That's kind of where Dobbins will end up, just because a little bit concerned about the layoff, slightly concerned a little bit about, sharing a little too much with Gus Edwards coming off his best game. Now, if Dobbins is out, I do think there's a chance for Edwards to have a decent game, because 3 running backs in a row, 96 rushing yards or more against the Patriots. And he has scored 4 touchdowns in the 3 games that Dobbins has been out. So he could fall into the end zone and get you 50 yards rushing like he did last week. Wouldn't be surprised.
All right, Arizona's at the Rams. Well, I was going to ask starter sit Cooper Kupp, but Heath already said that's a guy he wants to avoid. So Heath, starter sit Kyler Murray.
He is like the best for me of those high upside QBs that I also recognize have no floor. I'd put Kyler and Caleb and Anthony Richardson in that group. He's a low end starter. I'd start Baker and over him, but there's not for the most part. I'm starting Kyler Murray.
All right, Jamey, I'll give you this one because we already talked about Garrett Wilson. Jets are at the Bills. How do you feel? Are we going to get a little squeaky cricket, squeaky wheel for Garrett Wilson?
I think so. I think it's more a late game situation as opposed to more targets, because it's not like he's not getting targets. He's the 4th most targeted receiver in the NFL. So he's still going to get his opportunities. I think what he's been more upset about is when he's gotten his targets, so do they feed him early? Do they feed him late? You brought this up. Rodgers was kind of like, I don't know, when he was asked about it, about Wilson's being unhappy, not getting the ball. This is a tough situation across the board. Ownership obviously is a little bit of a joke right now after the Athletic story. Coach is not going to be there. Wilson seemingly wanting out. Well, where are you investing in this team if you're investing? Are you investing in the 40-year-old quarterback and 30-year-old wide receiver, or are you investing in this talent in Garrett Wilson that could still be a stud? I would hope they're investing in Garrett Wilson. And there's somebody saying something to anybody, feed the kid, make him happy. So he's a number 2 receiver. If you've been starting him, you're obviously starting him. I'm not getting cute and starting Adam Thielen over him, who's a waiver wire guy, or Jalen McMillan, who's a waiver wire guy, over Garrett Wilson. So you may have some tough calls, Cortland Sutton versus Garrett Wilson. You can debate. I agree with Heath. You probably don't want to start Cooper Kupp, but I think this is going to be a Rams blowout, and they get back on track because they're back indoors. So you can maybe debate Cooper Kupp versus Garrett Wilson. I would start Wilson, but I get it. I do think that he gets fed a little bit more.
Okay. So let's say, would you start, if he were to start, J.K. Dobbins or Garrett Wilson?
Wilson.
Non-PPR,
I'd start Dobbins, but PPR Wilson.
All right, next game, Colts are at the Giants. Starter sit Malik Neighbors. For the Colts, in their last 6 games, Calvin Ridley last week caught a deep touchdown. He's the only wide receiver that scored more than 13.2 PPR fantasy points against the Colts in their last 6 games. That would be the Jets guys, the Bills, the Lions guys, the Patriots, the Broncos, and the Titans. Malik Neighbors scores 13.2 fantasy points in his sleep. Unfortunately, he only scores about 13.2 fantasy points, but starter sit Neighbors.
I have one tough call. I'm curious what you guys would do of Malik Neighbors versus Drake London, because the rest of my team is loaded and one final spot. Right now I have Neighbors because PPR. I have Neighbors over London. A little nervous about London with the hamstring and, rookie quarterback on the road, and he could see a little bit of Lattimore if Lattimore plays. I think we talked about this. We don't know his status.
Neighbors for me, baby.
Is who?
No bias. Neighbors for me.
No, right now I have Neighbors in. But that's like real life Neighbors decision to me.
But for the most part, I'm starting Malik Neighbors in this situation too. So yes, I'm starting Malik Neighbors. He's a top 15 wide receiver for me.
All right, Tennessee's at Jacksonville. Do you trust any running back in this game? The Jaguars allow the second most fantasy points to running backs. The Titans have allowed 7 rushing touchdowns to running backs in their last 4 games, 3 last week to Taylor. Do you trust any running backs in this Titans-Jags game?
I'll trust Tony Pollard if he gets a full practice in. I'll trust Tyjae Spears if Tony Pollard is out.
I mean, just sit Pollard at this point. Can you make it easy for us, please?
Yes. All right. So, but you would start Pollard
if he gets a full practice. Right now, I've got them both ranked around RB30.
He's not going to get a full practice. He never full practice. He may not even practice.
I mean, Breece Hall just had an out of nowhere full practice last week and just was fine.
All right, so let's say just based on the trends, in all likelihood, that's not going to happen, in my opinion. So let's just say like he doesn't practice, or maybe gets in a limited, and then he plays. That's just what happens every week. Is Tony Pollard ahead of that Jerome Ford, Breece Hall group?
No.
He is for me.
Okay, Miami's.
I'm sorry, not Breece Hall, but he's in that mix. He's in that 16 through 20 mix. So Hall's ahead of him, but yes, he's right there.
Miami at Cleveland. How much faith do you have in the Dolphins' passing game?
So really, it's 2 receiving options, because Waddle plays, you're not trusting him, even if he does. I mean, I think most people, again, it's like Cooper Kupp and Garrett Wilson and some of these guys that have been struggling. You're starting Tyreek Hill. He had 2 balls in his hands that doesn't sound bad. He had 2 passes that hit him in the hands in the game against the 49ers that could have been touchdowns. So
yeah, Jamey, he sure did. All right.
So good comment from the chat, and worth looking at. Tony Pollard earns $250,000 if he gets to 1,100 rushing yards. He has 1017 right now.
Wow.
Tony Pollard earns $200,000 if he gets to 7 rush touchdowns. He has 5 right now.
Wow. Could be a 500.
So he's got a lot to play for. I would say he does not want to just sit out.
Carolina's at Tampa Bay. All right. Are we going to get another good game from Jalen McMillan?
I think so. I mean, I know what you're going to go back to when we talk about this is the last time he had a bad game was against Carolina, and Baker was bad in that game. Cade Otton is still banged up. We don't know if he's going to play or not. And you've just seen Baker get back to being Baker again since McMillan has emerged the last 3 weeks. It's kind of what he was doing when he had a healthy Chris Godwin. He's got 2 guys that he can rely on. Now, the other side of this is they could run all over the Panthers, and the passing game is a little bit, not as explosive. But I do think that this has a chance to be a back and forth game. I mean, the Panthers have done a good job moving the ball lately. Bryce Young has looked like a, legitimate NFL quarterback over the last 6 weeks, and hopefully he comes to play and the Panthers offense shows up and we get a hopeful shootout here. So I do like McMillan as in that group of guys, wide receiver 20 to 30, so I would call him in most weeks a number 2 receiver, so number 3 receiver by rankings. I think he's a potential starter across the board.
And he's got that upside that you might be looking for if you started somebody who's a dud, or you're going up against Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson. You need somebody that might be able to catch a 40-yard touchdown. He's got that kind of upside. He's got that Jameson Williams upside.
Jalen McMillan has 6 to 7 targets in 3 straight games. There have been 6 wide receivers with 6 to 7 targets against the Panthers this year, and they have ranged anywhere from 2.3 fantasy points to 20.2 and all in the middle, so nothing conclusive there. And I personally would start McMillan over guys like Joe Mixon, Jackson Smith and Jigba, start over Keenan Allen.
It's a good call. It's a really good call. Hopefully.
Yeah. You know what? I'd start over Nico Collins. Green Bay at Minnesota. I honestly think one of the most difficult questions this week is how to project Green Bay's passing game and what to do with their wide receivers. So we just sort of mentioned it earlier, but Dave, would you start any Packers wide receivers this week against the Vikings?
Not with supreme confidence. I do think that there's going to be an uptick in targets for all of the receivers and tight end that play for the Packers. But this is still a team that's going to spread the ball around. And we don't know for sure if anybody's going to even be able to hit that 7-8 target range. Minnesota's been better against slot receivers than outside receivers over their past 5 games. So maybe that helps Dobbs. Maybe that helps Wicks. Maybe that hurts Jaden Reed, but we've seen Reed come through with touchdowns just from cool plays that they designed for him. I do think this has a potential to be a fairly high-scoring game. So these are receivers that I would look at in that flex range. I would rank them Dobbs, Reed, Wicks as of now. None of them are top 24. I don't even know if any of them are top 30. They're not. For me, they're not. But I would be nervous to start any of them as high upside plays. Again, talking about situations where you need to play from behind in fantasy. You're up against somebody who started the Seahawks DST and they got you a ton of points and you need to catch up. I don't think there's any receiver here that I would go with that hope that they've got huge upside to get you a 20-point game.
All right, Atlanta's at Washington. Jamie, rank these 3 players. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Brian Robinson Jr. Let's say it's half PPR.
Half PPR, I'd go London, Robinson, Mooney.
Full PPR?
London, Mooney, Robinson.
I would take that order in half PPR too. I might even take it in non-PPR. I like what I saw from Michael Penix last week, and I think he's going to have to throw more this week. And Mooney was the guy that he had good timing with on downfield routes, a couple of out routes that those two connected on. I'm kind of encouraged by what these Falcons receivers can do with Penix. They honestly should have moved to Kirk Cousins like 3-4 weeks ago, or moved away from Cousins, I should say, 3 or 4 weeks ago.
All right, let's go to Detroit at San Francisco. Rank these 3 players. Jamison Williams, Deebo Samuel, and Isaac Guerrero, assuming he plays.
Mm-hmm. Half PPR, I'm assuming?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I will go with Guerrero, Jamison, Deebo.
I'll go Jamison, Guerrero, Deebo.
And Dallas at Philadelphia. Can you trust A.J. Brown and or Devontae Smith?
Trust is an interesting word when you're talking about Kenny Pickett, who's less than 100%, playing against what has turned out to be a better Dallas defense, as you've noted time and time again, since Michael Parsons has come back. So they are enjoying playing the role of spoiler, and I'm sure they would love to go into Philadelphia and, wreak some havoc there against the backup quarterback. So I'm still starting A.J. Brown. I find it hard to get away. Like what I saw last week was basically what we saw from CeeDee Lamb without Dak Prescott. Got fed, still produced. You could trust that.
Yeah.
I don't think Kenny Pickett is a complete disaster. He's bad, but he's not a complete disaster. Devontae Smith is a little bit tougher, because you saw 6 for 51, so the catches were there, yards were not, had a huge drop, so how much does that play into the mind of everybody? I doubt it, but you never know. So he'd be the one I'd be more concerned about.
Okay. Would you start Devontae Smith or Jamison Williams, Deebo Samuel?
I would start those guys over him, yeah.
I'd start Jamo over Devontae. I wouldn't start Deebo over Devontae.
The thing about that matchup could be fantastic for the 49ers offense, just because Detroit's defense is so beat up right now.
I'm kind of feeling Deebo.
Yeah, me too.
I had a gut feeling about him last week. I wish I had more conviction. Because it was obvious 2 weeks ago, that horrible rain game against the Rams, that they were trying to get Deebo involved, and he's got 5 carries in 2 of his last 3 games. Now, Guerrero comes back. I think that might change.
Right. That could change the whole tenor of the offense. Like now they're going to have confidence to run the ball. Last week they didn't. That's why there were so many screens and short throws.
I don't think they can run the ball. Not the same way, and they're going to probably be chasing points here based on how the Detroit offense operates.
All right. And finally, Las Vegas is at New Orleans. Which Raiders running back do you prefer?
Abdullah.
Certainly in PPR, it's got to be Abdullah.
They had very similar. Didn't they have the same amount of catches or within one catch or something? They split third down work, and gosh, just Madison is just so not good. But yeah. All right. I'm agonizing over this one personally. I don't know. But all right. You guys are saying Abdullah.